Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Capital Campaign Readiness. Can you answer these 6 questions? My name is Jenna Notar-Francesco. I am an account executive at CauseVox, and today I am joined by Carlin Shulsky and Kevin Wallace, and they are here to share with us more about capital campaigns and capital campaign readiness, and what it means to dive into a capital campaign, what that would look like for your organization, and some things to keep in mind as you prepare. So again, this is hosted by CauseVox, and we are so excited to have you all here. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about taking tons and tons of notes. We will be sending out an on-demand view of this webinar, and you will also have a copy of the slides as well with any additional resources that we provide you today. While you're watching the webinar, if you have any questions, you can always drop them in our Q&A pane at the bottom, or even just chat it in. But while we wait for folks to join, I would invite you to just, leave us a message in the webinar chat. We would love to know your name, where you're from, your organization, and maybe one question you might be holding about capital campaigns, because we're so excited to answer all of your questions today. So welcome, everyone. I myself am from New York City. I'm in Queens, New York City right now. It's a nice, lovely day, I guess, a bit cold, but so here we are. Hi, Sherry. Access Community Action Agency in Connecticut. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Hi, Melissa. North Carolina. We've got some East Coast folks here, but also Missoula. Hey, Carla's there too. Hey, Ashley. Oh, wow. So you're getting ready. Ashley is getting ready to get their capital campaign up and running in the next year. So perfect timing. Hello to Denise in Ontario Shores at the Ontario Shores Foundation for Mental Health in Ontario. And Elijah, welcome, welcome. Hello to Kim. So we're just getting started here. It's about 1:02, so I am going to just keep going. I'm going to give a brief introduction to CauseVox for those of you who might not be aware, but so again, this is Capital Campaign Readiness. Can you answer these 6 questions? And today I am joined by Kevin Wallace, President and Partner at campaignCouncil.org, and Carlin Shulsky, Vice President and Partner at campaignCouncil.org, and I'm thrilled to introduce them in just a moment. But again, for those of you who are new to CauseVox, CauseVox is basically the most effective fundraising platform to help growing nonprofits, and we provide best-in-class donation forms that can be embedded on your websites, which are equipped with mobile payments. You can run unlimited campaigns and ticketing and peer-to-peer fundraising all in one place, which makes it really nice for your capital campaigns. We actually have a few organizations running capital campaigns currently, and I am happy to provide those examples, after the webinar and an email. If you want, please feel free to reach out. We do offer hands-on support and onboarding to all of our customers with real life people, not just robots. So if you have any questions, we can set up your campaigns with you on a call just to make you set up for success. And also we offer top-rated fundraising and education in the form of guides, templates, webinars like today's, and other courses just to make fundraising really easy. So again, we replace any outdated donation forms or complex solutions, and we just really streamline everything, help you to house everything under one roof, including your donation forms, any recurring gifts, pledge gifts, crowdfunding, peer-to-peer, and event ticketing. And again, with that, we help to modernize your donations. So we've put all of today's best marketing technology right in the donation form so that it gives your donors the easiest, fastest donation flow. And we've added a bunch of mobile wallets. So we've got Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, Venmo. We've got ACH, direct bank transfer, just to help you give more convenience to your donor and how they want to make payments. That's especially important for, if you're doing a capital campaign. We do offer automated pledges, and those are particularly beneficial for long-term capital campaigns, just to automate that process. If you want to, you can always sell event tickets in combination with your donations and peer-to-peer fundraising and pledges. And we have that integrated right on your page. And then again, hands-free peer-to-peer fundraising is incorporated. You can add this to any of your campaigns so that you can mobilize your strongest supporters to raise funds on your behalf and really push the needle. So if you're interested in learning more about, you have the tools and the techniques to run a campaign, now you just need the actual product, you need the form itself. Feel free to stop by our demo page on our website. I'll drop the chat in later, but you can book a demo with me directly or watch our pre-recorded demo on demand. And if you're interested in learning any other tips or tricks on current fundraising trends or best practices, you can subscribe to our blog. We send out free resources every week, so you'll want to stay up to date with that. And so now I am going to hand over today's session to Kevin Wallace, who is president and partner of campaignCouncil.org, specializing in capital campaign planning and management since 2003. He is based in Southern Arizona, where he loves to trail run. He thrives on his work with nonprofits to achieve their expansion and goals and advance their mission. And he'll be speaking today with Carlin Shulsky, who is also at the campaignCouncil.org. She is the vice president and partner there. And she is a campaign consultant who oversees the company's systems and information processes. And Carlin and her family live in Missoula, Montana, where they enjoy the spoils of the Rocky Mountain West. And so I am thrilled to welcome them. So please drop in lots of emojis and chats. Welcome them in the chat today. So yeah, thank you. Handing it over to you now.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thanks so much, Jenna.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for joining us. Carlin's going to pull up our slide deck, and just to give you a quick background on our company. As Jenna said, we've been around since 2003. We've done over 70 capital campaigns, and that's nationwide, with just about every type of nonprofit that you can think of, and from food banks to zoos to hospitals to libraries. And we love the challenge of going into different types of communities and seeing these wonderful projects and trying to help them along the way, and whether it be in campaign planning or management. In this particular webinar that we've been putting on now for a little while, both Carlin and myself really should be able to give you, the nonprofit, a good idea of where do we stand in our capital campaign readiness, and have we addressed everything that we need to address in order to be successful moving forward. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Carlin, and she's going to get us started.
Thanks. So before we dive into the agenda, the first question I have for you is, what's your plan? So I always think about back in my theater and dance days, you can't do a dance without knowing the choreography. You can't go play a brand new sport without knowing the rules or even watching the sport. So capital campaigns are no different. You need to have a plan. You need to know what the guidebook is going to be. So as we're going through this agenda today, this is really designed to address these 6 questions and all of the different essential pieces of information that you need to have in order to really address that question and think to yourself as the nonprofit leader, am I ready to do this? So these 6 questions are really going to guide you through your ability to answer that question. So the first one is related to the benefit of your project. So diving into this, we'll explore if there's a quantifiable benefit to expanding or improving your infrastructure. And then going from that, we want to take a look at if your board supports the project, if your staff supports the project, any of the other internal stakeholders that really need to be on board with moving forward with the capital campaign. And then the third piece that we ask next is, are your project costs current and realistic? So those two things have to be addressed related to your project costs for you to be successful in this campaign. And then the next question is, do you need to do a professional feasibility study? And if you do, the fifth question is, what kind of consulting firm do you need to hire? And then the final question is, if you know when to start. So Kevin's going to kick us off with the first question.
Quantifiable benefit. And oftentimes when we're thinking about doing capital campaigns, we're saying, well, our nonprofit needs A, B, and C. We need a bigger space. We need a better location. And that's great. And that's about the need of your organization. But in order to have a successful campaign, you need to flip that into quantifying it into a benefit to your clients, to your region, to the people that you're serving, and or to help empower them to move further in their life. So quantifiable benefit starts with your mission. So if our mission is to, let's say we are a FQHC and we're to provide primary care services to individuals that can't afford insurance. Okay, great. Do we have enough space? Well, we really don't have enough space in order to be providing enough primary care services. All right, so then let's expand it. So quantifying it from, we need to grow from providing care to 100 patients a day to 150 patients a day. And what is driving that need? I'd like you to quantify that as well. Well, our community has gotten a little bit bigger. We're just coming off of a health scare, and more people are concerned about their health in general. So that's kind of in the service population area. And then also, oftentimes what we see is we'll see a bump in capital campaign need. COVID, everything on the kind of the lifestyle side of things slid way off, but everything on the healthcare side of things went way up when COVID hit us. So there are things that are occurring within our local economies and or even the national economy that can help us quantify why are we jumping into this capital campaign. Really, it's a matter of which route are you going to take when you're thinking about a capital campaign. So just to make sure that we're sharing the same terms, capital campaign is specifically about infrastructure. You're going to go out there and you're going to expand. Maybe you've got a big old piece of land and you're only taking up a little bit of it. Your parking's not going to get in the way and you can just add on a little bit more to your existing infrastructure. Or maybe you want to go out and build completely new infrastructure, which is going to entail getting another piece of land somewhere else. And can you afford doing that? And what is is there going to be any pushback because of the types of services that you're providing from the neighbors and or from the surrounding businesses? So are we going to expand? Are we going to build new? And this can be part of both of those, is collaborating with other nonprofit organizations and or with government entities. We're seeing a lot more of this right now. In fact, I'm in the Tempe, Arizona right now, and we're doing a project with the Salvation Army to where they are specifically going out and saying, are there opportunities for us to partner with nonprofit, non-government, or government entities in order to better provide our services and or to at least make sure that we're not duplicating the services? And I tell you what, donors love this. Carlin, in her hometown, and I noticed that some of you are from Missoula, you've had the great pleasure of visiting, I hope, the Missoula Public Library. That's a project that, it must be over 6 years ago now, we started their feasibility study, and it's got nested within the library. It's got 3 other nonprofits in there. So what's so cool about it is you can go to the library, but you can also get a STEM extension for kids through the University of Montana, or you can get more parenting skills through Family First, or you can go down at the first floor or ground level and learn about production, video production, and audio production with their local cable provider. So when we are doing that campaign, people just love the idea. But you mean all these things can be done and they're going to collaborate? We don't have to give to like 3 organizations. We can give to one organization that help. So very, very cool way for them to go. It's a balancing act at the end of the day. So you've got on one side the needs of our nonprofit, and on the other side, you've got the needs of or how meeting those needs are going to benefit your community. And kind of right there in the middle is we're telling you, you need to quantify it. You can't just say, all right, my nonprofit needs more space. And you can't just say, hey, we've had a health scare out here and more people need primary care doctors. You need to bring the two together and quantify them so that what you're presenting to your prospective donors is you've identified a problem and you've got a solution for them, for yourselves, to actually address that problem. So that's how we quantify the needs and benefits. And let's go back over to our agenda and have Carlin join back in.
So the next question is, does your board support the project? And this comes down to those 3 things that I'm sure you as nonprofit leaders hear and say all the time. Do they give with time? Do they give with talent? Do they give with treasure? So the time, talent, and treasure that they're already giving to your organization is the baseline. But when you're in a capital campaign, there needs to be an additional commitment of time, talent, and treasure as you're going forward. And this in particular related to the time is one of the biggest sticking points that we really always try to reinforce with our clients, because it goes beyond just attending the board meetings and signing off on the agendas and agreeing with the different campaign updates that are happening. Really, it takes your board members time to think about deeply who their connections are, who they might know, who knows someone that's really going to help move the needle on this project in your community. So the time is more than just the perfunctory expectations of board members' time, particularly when we're thinking about a capital campaign. You know, we need them digging through their Rolodex or their contact info in their phone and helping you look online and asking neighbors to see who has the contact information for this one person that everyone keeps saying, oh, we really need to speak with Bob Smith down the street, but no one's been able to get in touch with him. So the time is really elevated for your board members and then for your campaign committee members when that time comes for a capital campaign. So again, the time, the talent, and the treasure for a capital campaign is in addition to what they're already doing for your organization. But without that, you don't have that 100% buy-in in order for your organization to move forward. But beyond that, you as the nonprofit leader may not have the buy-in and support that you need from your board in order to really push you through this process. Capital campaigns take years, especially when you factor in the feasibility study. Perhaps you have an election that is going to be part of this for a mill levy or a bond. So this is not a 12-month in and out done kind of situation. This is 12, 18, 24 plus months that you are going to be in it with your board. So there's a couple factors that we always recommend you think deeply about in terms of your board's readiness when you're thinking about your overall capital campaign readiness. And the first one is campaign experience. So they don't have to have done a capital campaign before, but it's certainly helpful if they have. It's a different process to do capital campaign major gift fundraising than it is for your ordinary annual campaigns where you're sending letters and doing social media posts and hopefully making some strong one-on-one major gift asks as well. But your capital campaign is millions of dollars, and you cannot achieve that through those more annual campaign methods like direct mail, email, social media solicitation. So a lot of this, almost all of this, is peer-to-peer solicitations. So if your board has the experience doing that, that's fantastic. If they don't, that's okay. As long as they're trainable and they're willing to learn and willing to adhere to the process, then they're in a good spot. So think about their campaign experience. Also think about their campaign expectations of you as the nonprofit leader. Are they expecting you to carry this multi-million-dollar weight on your shoulders alone? Or are they going to be willing to step up and provide that requisite time that I just described? Are they going to share their connections and open the doors to the people that they know in the community? Are they going to join you on those asks and really be part of the process and be very engaged? Or are they going to sit back, say, great job, Kevin, you are doing fantastic, we're here for you at the next meeting, and kind of rubber stamp it, and then you're all done? Hopefully it's the first and not the latter, because you, as this nonprofit leader, cannot shoulder this burden by yourself. You need the support both from their activities and their engagement, but you also need that emotional support that these people are behind you and you're united in your vision and your mission to move your nonprofit and elevate you to the next level where you're going to be able to serve even more members of your community in this brand new or renovated space that you've envisioned. So those expectations that your board has of you really should be explored prior to you being able to determine if you're ready for a capital campaign. And so I already started to talk about the buy-in. And one of the best ways that buy-in can be perceived and discussed is through an outside consultant coming in and helping with your feasibility study. Most consultants, our firm included, start with board member interviews in the feasibility study process. So having those one-on-one honest conversations, preferably with that outsider, really gives the board members an individual chance to sit down with your consultant and say, look, I think Kevin's great, but he doesn't have what it takes in order to pull this off. Or maybe he says, Kevin is fantastic and he's the right visionary leader that we need for a project like this to be successful. So that candid feedback then allows your consultant to tailor the plan as you're looking to move forward with this capital campaign. So Kevin's going to walk us through project costs.
One of my favorite stories as a capital campaign consultant is we've done several private high school campaigns over the years, and one of them was in Encino, California. So that's just a little bit north of LA. And we had done some work with this client in the past, and they came to us, all right, we're building a pool. It's going to cost us $5 million. It's going to be a super cool pool. Community's going to be able to love it, use it. School's going to love it. It's going to be perfect. Like, all right, here we go. And we're probably about 6 months along, and they come back and the president is just completely devastated and so bummed out. And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, we just got an update on our numbers. And I said, what do you mean an update? He goes, well, the $5 million number that was about 3 or 4 years old, it's $12 million. That's a lot. That's like more than so. Moral of the story is, please don't work with old numbers, especially in this economy. Everything is gone up in price so much, and even if your numbers are right now less than a year old, they're old. So if you're building new or you're acquiring existing, so you're going to have to do a lot of renovations, or you're going to start from a ground level. And by the way, if you don't know that answer right now, if you don't know exactly where you're going to go and you're thinking, well, I absolutely should not go into a feasibility study before I know exactly where we're going to be, please don't worry about that, because sometimes the answer will come to you. And I'll harken back to our friends at Missoula Public Library. They didn't know if they wanted to stay at their existing location and just essentially tear down the existing library and rebuild, or if they wanted to go into acquire another existing infrastructure. And it wasn't until we were about halfway through the feasibility study that one of the bigger donors to the project said, I've got the perfect solution. I own all this land right next to the library. We'll do a landscape in it. And it worked out beautifully. So don't pin yourself in that you have to have these acquire new, build existing, build new. Sometimes you can figure that out all out during your study, and your donors can be a big help with that. Remember that your budget is much more than just your building. So you've got architectural fees, you've got consultants, like if you're working with capital campaign consultants, you've got bonding, you've got FF&E, that's your fixtures and your furniture and your equipment. Sometimes you're going to have to pay for environmental assessments. So make sure that you're adding all of these things into your budget. Like I already said, construction quotes are less than 2 years old, and probably in this type of economy, maybe even less than 1 year old. Zoning, environmental assessments, neighbors, and let me come back to, the zoning and the environmental assessments, your city, your county, your state, they're going to have all these regulations for you. What you aren't going to know is about what kind of stink your neighbors might make, and whether that just be because you're going to increase the congestion in the area, or it's because you're going to be working with a population, let's say it's the homeless population, that people aren't going to want in their neighborhood. So that NIMBY, not in my backyard, you really got to test that before you actually secure a location. And then finally, we're going to look at cash flow and estimates on bridge loans. And this is just a real simple Excel spreadsheet that you can find online at our website, where if you put in this one, that top row shows that it's a $10 million capital campaign, then we guesstimate pledges based on kind of best practice and what we see with 5-year pledge redemption. And then you stick in all of the green stuff. So that savings, are you going to actually sell something like your existing building, and when is that going to happen? You might also have some bond revenue or new market tax credits that are going to come in at some point. So you stick in all of those green numbers, and then you go below and you say, all right, well, what is my project overhead going to be? Remember those other fees, your consulting fees, your architectural fees, and when they come due. Your infrastructure costs, your general contractor can give you an idea of when those are going to hit. And all of this is to help you answer one very simple question. That is, am I going to have enough money in the bank to pay all these folks that are lined up to be receiving funds? So you see, in this example, in year 4, they're following actually into a deficit with this stuff. They're $300 in the black, or I'm sorry, in the red. So they're going to have to plan for that, which generally means a bridge loan or working with maybe one of their donors to potentially speed up their pledge payoff. You can get all of these things again on our website. It's a free download. You can start kind of playing with the numbers and see whether or not you're going to hit a spot based on your up-to-date construction estimates where you're going to run into a cash flow problem. So let's go back over to our agenda and Carlin for the next part.
So the next question you need to ask yourself in order to determine if you're ready for a capital campaign is asking if you need to do a professional feasibility study. So that's hiring a consultant who's going to lead your organization through this capital campaign planning process. And the answer to this is yes. Most of the time, you do need to hire an outside professional. And one of the biggest reasons for this is just from preserving your own time. You, as the nonprofit leader, are likely already wearing like at least 5 or 6 other hats. So if you were to take on this hat of capital campaign consultant, it's going to minimize the amount of time that you're able to focus on your many other tasks at hand. And the idea of conducting 30 to 50 plus interviews for this feasibility study just may not fit into your calendar. But we'll talk more in just a minute about if you are going to do a feasibility study yourself. And if you are going to do it yourself, our recommendation is that you have to be able to answer yes to these next 4 questions. And not only yes, absolutely. So the first question that you need to ask yourself to decide if you can do this feasibility study on your own is if you have a strong donor-approved case for support for this project specifically. And the part that I emphasize there is the donor-approved piece. That means that all of the different elements of this project, so the new communities that you're going to be able to address in having this new facility, the different expanded programs that you're going to be able to offer, all of those different elements that you internally envision have been tested with your outside potential donors. And they are passionate about it too. They're sharing their feedback about why they think this project matters and why it's going to make an impact in your local community. So you've really tested this. You have some outside knowledge of what people think from the exterior perspective. And that's been woven back into your case for support document that is going to become the backbone for all of your capital campaign materials and planning and everything going forward. So if you do have the chance to test those kinds of ideas with your outside donors, and you've been able to adjust your case for support accordingly, then you can say, yes, absolutely. I've already done that. I know what people are going to be passionate about. I know what they may care less about. So I feel good about this. So while we're thinking of our library examples, I'll give you one more example related to the donor approved case for support. We were just working with the library up in Polson, Montana, and they were super jazzed about these library shelves that were going to be on casters. And this was in the midst of COVID that we were doing the feasibility study. And really the opportunity to move your bookshelves so that you could have more space for socially distanced events was really cool during COVID, and still is a factor that should be considered, God forbid anything else like this happens in the future. But when we were presenting this element of the case alongside the other wonderful things that this library is going to include in their renovation, people were like, yeah, shelves, they move. That's exciting. Not that exciting. So that piece of the case for support was certainly not as highlighted as it would have been had the library staff and the library foundation been the ones writing it, because in their opinion, it was the bee's knees. So that's just one example of the things that you think are really important may not be perceived as important by your donors. So having that donor approved case for support is key to knowing that you can do this feasibility study on your own. The second piece is if you have 100% board buy-in. So I already talked about that. So just think back to those points that I made earlier. But really, you need to know that you have this deep understanding of what your board's expectations are of you. Everything from the timeline, how fast you're going to be able to get this done, what your responsibilities are versus their responsibilities, and what your staff's responsibilities are going to be too, considering that you are all taking this on together in addition to your other duties. So if that means that some of the maybe, and this would make Kevin and I so happy, maybe you drop one or two of your golf tournaments or those events that aren't super lucrative, but take a ton of your staff's time to plan. Maybe you drop one of those in order to focus more of their planning efforts on this capital campaign. So thinking about if you know that you have 100% board and staff buy-in, then yeah, that's one more checkbox in the absolutely box that you can do this on your own. So the third piece to consider is if you all have strong capital campaign experience, and I mean all of you. So you've all done a capital campaign before. Everyone knows how to do this on their own. You're all bringing different experiences to the table with maybe some modifications with some differences in there. So if you've all done this before, then that's great. Then you really could probably do this feasibility study on your own. And then the last question is, do you have a strong, broad base of major gift donors? So $10,000 and up or $25,000 and up, depending on the size of your organization, that you know are going to support this project. So let's come back to the pool example that Kevin gave earlier. In that particular scenario, they bypassed a feasibility study entirely and went straight into a capital campaign. And once they got there, they said, yeah, well, we have all these donors that give a lot of money to scholarships every year. So if they can afford to give that to scholarships, certainly they can afford to give to this pool. But the pool is a pretty specific funding opportunity. And many of the people who choose to support students' access to this private education didn't feel that their dollars made as much sense going to a pool initiative as well. Even though, sure, there's the wonderful pieces about attracting different students and the elevation that will get the local school and the bigger community. Those cases could be made, but they just assumed that those major gift donors were going to translate into project donors, and that was not the case. So if you know that you have a strong, broad base of big supporters that are going to support you in this endeavor, then perhaps you could do this feasibility study on your own. But our guidance is that unless you can say yes, absolutely to all 4 of these questions, it's probably best for you to hire a professional feasibility study consultant to do that part of the campaign planning for you. And I'm not being biased because I'm a campaign consultant. It's just a proven fact that the groups that have worked with consultants in the past meet your goal more quickly and more frequently. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you're thinking about this. A couple of other pieces that we caution against is if you're going to do this yourself, know that people's intended gift amounts may be less accurate. So this is particularly true if you're a startup nonprofit. You are the executive director and you founded this, and your board members are mostly your peers and friends that were with you, supporting you from the beginning in this endeavor. So they may not want to let you down. They may tell you they're going to give higher than they actually can just because they want this to move forward, knowing that this is your vision. So there may be a little bit of gray area there with getting the intended gift amount asks from people during the feasibility study. The next piece to consider is that you may find that your staff and your board and your donors may be less honest amongst your friend group, particularly if they're all in the room together. It's really easy as a board member to kind of sit back and say, well, I don't know if this is such a good idea, but she's nodding and he's nodding, so maybe I just need to nod too, even though I'm a little scared about what this is going to entail. Having that honesty with an outside consultant is a really good way that you can truly get that feedback about what your roadblocks might be ahead of a capital campaign so that your group can partner with that consultant to address those issues before you get too far down the road. Another piece to consider is your credibility. So if you were to do this feasibility study on your own and you get to the point of talking with the significant philanthropists in your community, those philanthropists have done countless of feasibility study interviews, and they know what the process is. They know what questions they should expect to be asked, and they know what they want to tell you as the consultant. So if you, as the nonprofit leader, come in and try to do this feasibility study interview yourself, they may question if you're really following the correct process in order to get from A to B and be successful with their investment in your nonprofit for a capital campaign. So keep that in mind as well. And I said it before, I'll say it again just very quickly. If you do hire a professional consultant, you are more likely to be successful in your overall campaign. So now Kevin's going to talk about the kinds of firms that are available for you to hire should you hire a professional one.
We're going to keep this pretty simple, and that is distinguishing between small and big firms. And we'll consider ourselves a small one, even though there are 4 of us, and I was a one-man show for years and years. And so there are a lot of consultants out there that are just islands. I mean, they're out there, they're doing good work. But then you start getting up into the bigger firms where you've got a dozen or more employees, probably spread across the country. The pluses and minuses of them, usually you're going to see smaller firms are less expensive. The caveat there is sometimes consultants are super specialized and like they're only doing zoos. And so they're charging more because they've done, 30 zoos across the world. So maybe those types would be more expensive, but typically smaller firm, less expensive, more personal teams. Like on our side of things, when Jenna was introducing us, she mentioned that Carlin does a lot of data analysis, and she does that for all of our clients, regardless if she's a primary consultant for them or not. So there's a little bit of overflow, and the reason that we do that is Carlin is a lot better at data analysis than I am, and or the other team members we've got. So smaller firms, usually just one person, and he or she is doing everything and being the point person for you on all of the different things that happen during a capital campaign. The bad thing is fewer capabilities. Usually smaller firms, they only are carrying a couple of clients. They don't have enough revenue to really kind of pull in all of the extra things that you might need, especially if you're a smaller, medium-sized nonprofit, i.e. wealth screening. And it's nice to be working with a professional that has those available to them. The negative side of the bigger firms, so again, these are 12 or more, and you see them advertising in AFP and all over the place, and they're going to be more expensive. And just to give you a quick kind of apples to apples, if you're doing a feasibility study and working with a smaller firm, depending on the market, but you might be paying as little as $20,000 for that feasibility study. Whereas if you're working with a big firm, you might be paying closer to $40,000 or $50,000 for that feasibility study. So there is quite a lot of difference between the two. Kind of a plus and a minus of the bigger firms is you might not have the same contacts throughout, but they're going to have more capabilities, and that's the one beneath it. So again, with our firm, if we're going to do a deep data dive with you, and maybe you've seen Carlin's pretty face on the website, but you've never worked with her, then we're going to hand her off to you for a little while to do that deep data dive. We see that as a plus because she's very good at it, and I could not get nearly as intricate with the data as she can. But again, it's kind of a plus minus with the bigger firms, and you might get handed off, so it's not all one-on-one consultant to client relationships, but sometimes there are some other people interjecting themselves. The type of consulting firm, one of the scenarios we like to use is think of it as like a taco truck versus a big old buffet. So I know I want tacos. That's all I want. And I'm going to go there for my specific tacos. So I'm going to spend my $10. I'm going to get my favorite, carne seca taco, and I'm out. Or I'm not quite sure what I want. I'd like a bigger variety. I'm pretty dang hungry, so I'd like some more access to some more food. So I'm going to pay the $20 and I'm going to go into the buffet. Now, when I'm at the taco truck, I can start buying some extras. I can buy some pico de gallo or some guacamole or some other things. And those prices are going to start to add up because that smaller consultant is going to have to charge me for each one of those additional services. Whereas if I'm over at the buffet, typically you just kind of get these services because it's all rolled into their fee with you. So ultimately, we want you to choose wisely, and really take your time with this stuff. Carlin already told you a little bit about timelines, and we're going to talk some more about that. But if you're thinking that you're going to raise $5 million over the next 12 months and you haven't even done a feasibility study, I'm sorry, you're already off by 12 months. And don't ruin that ability to raise that much money by just going out real quickly, finding any consultant standing around on the street and have them help you. So take your time, do an RFP. We've got an example of an RFP on our website. That's a request for a proposal. Give you a good idea of how to get some consultants out of there. Be aware of consultants that seem part-time. A lot of folks that have been with nonprofits for a while, they lose their job, the economy changes, they go out, they hang up a consulting shingle and they call themselves consultants, even though they've really only worked for one or two nonprofits and they don't have very much depth or breadth of experience. Keep your budget should be kept close to under 10% for smaller projects and 5% for bigger. What I mean by that is if you're raising $5 million, your budget should be probably around $500,000 for your consulting fees. That's from start to finish. That might be a little bit high, but it's going to be in that range. That is not to say that any consultant you are hiring should be getting paid a percentage of funds raised. That is unethical. Don't work that way. I had somebody say to me the other day, yeah, but it shows they've got skin in the game. Like, it doesn't. It just shows that they probably don't have very much experience and they're trying to break into the consulting business by doing something that everyone that is part of AFP and everyone that's been doing it for a while realizes this is a fee for service business. So the 10% is not because they're getting paid a percentage of money raised. It's just a good marker. And then if you're in the $10 million plus range, your consulting fees, they're going to still probably be around $500,000. There's just not that much more work that we consultants do for really huge firms. It's just the duration of the contract. We're with our clients a lot longer. We've already talked about experienced consultants. They're going to get you to your goal faster. You're gonna hopefully be there on time within your plan instead of kind of Mickey Mousing around and the consultant doesn't really know what he or she is doing. And really don't worry as much about your organization type or your community. Like, we've done libraries and we've done hospitals and we've done zoos and we've done all these really cool things. But fundraising is fundraising. Yes, your project is completely unique and your community is completely unique and your donors are super unique. But the process that your consultant is going to take you through has been well tested and tried over the years. And it's, we've got webinars that talk about the actual process of the feasibility study and the capital campaigning. But just make sure you trust the people that you're working with and that you like working with them, because you're going to be with them for a couple of years. So don't think too much. I've got to work with somebody that's done nothing but FQHCs for the last 50 years, because that's going to limit you from really forming that personal synergistic relationship that you can get with a consultant when you really do take your time and choose the right one. All right, let's go back over to our agenda and timelines, the last segment.
That's right. So I'm sure you're all dying to know when you should start. So as Kevin just said, if you're thinking you needed to start yesterday, you might be right. One of the biggest things you need to do first is get your family on board. So having those internal conversations with your board yourself ahead of launching the feasibility study is a great idea. You want to make sure that you've got that support. And then your consultant will come in and have those additional one-on-one interviews. So once the family's on board all the way, we're going to back into this. So let's think if you need 3 to 5 months for your feasibility study. And as long as you're able to roll seamlessly from your study into your actual campaign, then it's probably 10 to 24 months for the campaign to be actively fundraising. But then think back to that cash flow chart that Kevin showed earlier. During that time, you have outright cash gifts, you have pledges that are being paid, maybe between a 3 to 5 year pledge redemption period. And then depending on how much cash you have to have in hand, that's when your construction can begin, just depending on how much you need to have in order for that to actually start. So if you're a visual person like me, it may help you to lay this out in a busy but clear kind of Excel spreadsheet here. So in this scenario, the gray pieces were exterior factors that were related to the campaign, but were out of the campaign's control. So there were some government organizations that were working on some environmental cleanup for a park, and then those pieces were going to be part of the campaign once the construction could actually get started. So knowing that those were happening in the background, all of the active fundraising and the feasibility study was happening in those colored blocks. So the capital campaign in this scenario took 18 to 24 months. And then there was the bond vote process that took another 6 to 8. And then eventually they were able to start building. So if it's helpful for you to not only back into it, but lay it out how you're going to get from A to B to C to Z when it's all finished, this could be a helpful way for you to design that in your mind. So one of the roadblocks I just mentioned. So if you're going to finish your feasibility study, your goal is to move as quickly as possible into your actual campaign fundraising. We say that feasibility studies have a shelf life of 6 to 12 months. If you wait much longer than that, after your feasibility study concludes, before you start actually fundraising, a lot of the responses that you got are no longer going to be valid, either because someone's priorities changed, a different nonprofit started something sooner and they got on it a little bit faster. So maybe that donor just doesn't have the capacity to support yours at the level that they initially said. Maybe your organization has had some leadership changes. So if your CEO or your board president was really the person driving this change, and then there's a leadership change, they want to go do something else instead, and your new person doesn't feel that this is the right next step, So then the feasibility study is concluded and there's this kind of re-envisioning that's happening internally. That can certainly be a huge roadblock as well. So, you never know when someone's going to make a career shift, but there's always the possibility that if you're relying on one person in that leadership role to be the driver behind this change, and then there's a shift in the leadership, that could certainly present a roadblock for you as you're going forward with the campaign vision. And then if you think back to Kevin's talking points about how your project costs need to be current and realistic, if your budget was not realistic and you have to start really cutting a lot of corners, that's going to take some time as well. And it also is kind of a bummer because oftentimes you've envisioned these really wonderful things, and that's part of what got your donors so excited. But because you were unrealistic or your quote was 4 years old, and so it really wasn't an accurate baseline anymore, now those cool factors that got your donors so excited during the feasibility study have to be cut because the foundation is going to be 3 times more expensive and you can't cut corners on the foundation. At least I hope you can't. So if you're value engineering because your budget was unrealistic in the first place, that will certainly stall your campaign quite a bit too. And thinking back to those synergistic partnership opportunities that Kevin described as well, that takes time. It takes time to build those relationships and get on the same page. And if you're sharing a really big campaign goal, figuring out which portion each nonprofit is potentially responsible for, that kind of relationship building takes time, but it needs to be accomplished before you do start fundraising because your donors are going to want to see that you really have your act together. And this last one, I can't stress enough, you have to make enough asks in order to be successful in this project. If you think that you're going to be able to count on these 4 major donors and then you're basically going to be done with your project, you're probably thinking wrong. You really need to make lots of asks and put your name out there a bunch because there will be people that still come in at gift levels that are lower than they indicated during the feasibility study. And there's going to be plenty of people that you didn't talk to during the study that are going to want to support, but may not be at that principal or significant leadership gift level. So we would love to answer your questions, but before we do that, just as a refresher, walking through these 6 questions really gives you a strong understanding if you are ready for a capital campaign. So if you know that there's a quantifiable benefit to improving or expanding your infrastructure, you know you have your board's support of the project, you have current realistic project costs that are going to guide your budget as you're going forward, you know that you need to do a professional feasibility study, and you know what kind of consulting firm you want to hire, and you know when you need to start, then you are teed up perfectly to start with the capital campaign planning study and get the ball rolling on your project's vision. So we would love to take questions. I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat, but I think Jenna has.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carlin. That was amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation. Excuse me. It looks like we have one question that's come in so far from Ashley. So she asks, are the consulting fees wrapped into the capital campaign funding asks? As in, are the fees expected to be paid by the nonprofit outside of any funding received during the capital campaign?
Why don't you take this, Carlin?
Sure. So we recommend that you build your consulting costs into your campaign goal. So that's consulting costs, but it's also your architecture, all of those other like outside costs that are not just your building, that's in your campaign goal. But and I'm not sure if this is what you mean, Ashley, but if you're paying for a feasibility study, that's obviously before your campaign fundraising has actually launched. So the feasibility study funding does typically need to come from whatever internal budget your nonprofit already has in order to allocate spending that money on the consultant to get you to the campaign fundraising. There are some grants that have been used in the past, particularly for more startup nonprofits, and they're not necessarily designed specifically for the purpose of paying for a feasibility study, but they've been foundations that have supported these nonprofits from the beginning and wanted these nonprofits to be successful with the campaign vision. So it's possible to get outside funding specifically for feasibility study costs, whether that's from grants or maybe you have donors that have kind of been acting like that foundation in that scenario I just described. They've been big champions of yours from the beginning, and they believe in the importance of a feasibility study. You might be able to make a fundraising ask specifically for funding that study or part of that study. So yes, the answer to your question is, or I guess no. The question is no, your consultant fees should not be coming from outside of the nonprofit per se. It should be built into your actual fundraising goals. So if you know it's going to be $3 million for your building, probably safe to add in another $500,000 for all of the various consultants and environmental testing groups and all of the other pieces that you might have to account for other than just the building and the FFE.
And really kind of the thing to keep in mind, Ashley, when you're looking at this is this an expense that the donor is not going to think is relevant to the capital campaign? And if you're with a bigger nonprofit, the donor's not going to care that much that you're taking on these extra expenses of, let's say, $500,000. You know, if you're a nonprofit that's bringing in $2, $3, $4, $5 million a year, for you, that's an expense that you can bear. And they might even come back and say, you know what, you can take on that expense. Let's have more of my donor dollars go directly towards the project. But what we see very frequently is the donors saying, you know what, that's right. This nonprofit needs to stay whole. This nonprofit needs to have more of its resources freed up for operations and for services so that we, the donor population, can pay for, in like Carlin said, the feasibility study would perhaps be paid for during your campaign later on, but perhaps not, because what if your study comes back and it says, no, we can't raise this much money and we're not ready for it. So you need to be ready for that expense to just be gone, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for fleshing that out. Looks like we have another question from Nancy. Have you ever included the executive director in feasibility study interviews because they are the better or best spokespeople for the project?
Have you ever included them in the feasibility study? Do you think they mean, like, do we interview them or do we take them along on the interviews?
Take them along, is my understanding.
Nancy, could you clarify if it was, do we bring them along or just interview them?
Take them along.
She says take them along.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of that. And here's why, because oftentimes you're going to have relationships with these donors and they're not going to be as honest with you in the room as they are with just a paid consultants in the room. And this comes in, this kind of weaves in a whole bunch of different things that consultants of different ilks are throwing around, like, confidential interviews, non-confidential interviews, do them in, there's all sorts of different theories out there. But from our perspective, really the important thing is we want to be sitting in front of your best community leaders and community philanthropists and getting their honest feedback on your organization's image, this project's case for support, their willingness to champion it and to give to it, and then other people that might be willing to champion it and give to it. And we've done, I don't know, over 3,500 interviews before. So, and probably 3,498 of them have been without the executive director. And usually he or she appreciates that because you've got a lot going on anyway, and you'd rather just hand this off to a consultant and trust that he or she is going to do a great job for you.
And adding on to that, this varies from consulting firm to consulting firm, but we spend quite a bit of time building out a PowerPoint deck that we use during our conversations with your donors. And that relies on a lot of back and forth communication between the ED and between us before we get there, because we want to be the best spokesperson for this project too. We're out there representing you in the community. And I think any consultant that you find is hopefully coming in with that same mindset, that they need to learn from your ED as much as they possibly can before coming into this. Even if it's not addressed in the slide deck, we've got a lot of internal FAQs and FYIs that we're keeping in mind in case someone asks a question that's kind of a one-off, but we didn't need to address it in the deck, but we still have the answer to it. And if we don't, then your consultant should absolutely follow up with that donor and maybe connect them to the ED afterwards so that they can talk more fluently about those two things together. But it should be up on your consultant's onus to really embrace being just as good of a rep for the project as the ED.
Excellent. We do have one more question. So we'll just take this last question and then we'll wrap up. From Alex, is there a rule of thumb to account for a potential discrepancy between the preliminary cost estimate and the actual project cost?
Yeah, the rule of thumb is this happens. Unfortunately, it happens almost 100% of the time. And in my next life, if I want to become an architect, I'm going to become an architect that comes up with a realistic expectation of what costs are going to be. So believe me, and Carlin and myself and the rest of our team, we run into this all of the time to where we're putting together the deck to go out and do a feasibility study. And we're like, give us a rendering of what this might look like, when it's done. And they're like, yeah, but don't worry. Just, we want to see the spirit of your vision. We want to see, how it sits and where the people come in and out. And because that's what, these visuals excite potential donors. They're not going to hold you to it. Believe me, when we went from a $5 million pool to a $12 million pool, it took some rearranging, but the spirit of it was the same. We're going to bring a pool here. Okay, we made a big mistake, silly us, and now we got to raise twice as much money. But as long as it's sticking with your mission, and as long as you're not being irresponsible to it, the most common response is, and believe me, it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you have it. Spoken directly from Kevin and Carlin themselves. This has been fantastic. You are the experts, and I'm just so happy that you got a chance to speak to our audience today. And it seems like we had a lot of engagement, so thank you so much. To everyone still on the call, I'm just going to paste in a few of the resources that were mentioned during today's webinar. As always, you receiving these in a follow-up email. And so these were just some of the resources that were presented in the slide deck. And in addition, I am also going to drop in our demo request in case you had any questions. Once you're ready and you're through your process and your feasibility study and you're ready to start collecting those pledges and donations, we would love to help you on that journey and just convert as many donors for you as possible. So you can book a demo with CauseVox or subscribe to our blog for additional resources. And if you have any additional questions, you can email us at support@causevox.com. Or I'm sure also Carlin and Kevin would be happy to answer any questions. If you had any interest in their consulting services, you can reach out to them at their emails. And yeah, this has been fabulous. Thank you again so much, Kevin and Carlin. And we will talk soon, hopefully. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.